let's go ahead and get started. It's 6:30 and we should be gaining some more people joining the program. What you were looking at were some different installation shots from the Below the Bark exhibition at the Missoula Art Museum that features Jim Frazier, Tim Musso, and Suze Wolf's artwork in the silver and shot galleries at the Missoula Art Museum. The Missoula Art Museum sits on Salish and Pend Oreille land, and we always start all of these artist talks by letting people know that we really respect the indigenous stewards of this land and really acknowledge how their rich cultures have been fundamental to artistic life in Montana, are fundamental to artistic life in Montana, and to the work that we do here at the Missoula Art Museum with our dedicated focus on contemporary Native artists. That's a little bit different than what we're focusing on tonight. And this exhibition brings together these three artists, Jim, Tim, and Suze, with Dr. Diana Six, who's the UM professor of forest entomology and pathology. And she's worked as the scientific consultant for this project. That's a term that gives her giggles almost, because we put it on her name tag at the opening reception the other evening, and she saved the name tag because it's so rare to have a scientific consultant name tag. Really, it's these artists who've been making work in response to Dr. Diana Six's research on the Montana bark beetle infestation, deforestation, and climate change, and that's what brings us here this evening. The way that it worked, none of these artists were really too much in touch with one another before this project got initiated. And so it's with great pleasure that each of the artists gathered in the gallery last Friday, met one another, saw the work in person for the first time, and responded to the exhibition. And it almost felt like a family reunion or a homecoming in a certain way. The exhibition focuses mostly on pine and spruce bark beetles, and that term bark beetle is really kind of a non-scientific catch-all, which we'll get into a little bit more here as we delve in. This exhibition, I wanted to say, is sponsored by the Holiday Inn, and we're really grateful for that exhibition support because it allows us to do programs like this. I did also want to point to the University of Montana and say thank you for this wonderful collaboration, both with the forestry, but also with the School of Art. And we have Suze Wolf and Tim Musso here as visiting artists at the University of Montana, interacting with drawing and printmaking students and sculpture students and forestry students. And so it's really been a very fruitful gathering. Tim is in residence at Matrix Press, and if you want to stop by the printmaking studio and see what they're printing, they've been cutting blocks and preparing paper, and they're getting ready to print on Wednesday and Thursday of this week. And there's some other opportunities to interact with the artists while they're on campus. With that, I wanted to open it up and turn it over to Diana and let you take it away and give us kind of an overview and an introduction to the project.
Okay, I will go ahead and do that. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully, yeah, here we go. Hopefully everybody can see this. Seem to be going forward when I shouldn't be. Anyway, thank you for joining us. I know we have a dispersed audience. Some of you are not in Missoula, but for those that are local, I would really like to encourage you to come down and see the exhibit. It has really turned out to be very phenomenal. So I'm not an artist, I'm not exhibiting, but as Brandon said, I'm an ecologist and a forest entomologist. And I've been working with bark beetles about 25 years. And interesting, in the last few years, I've had quite a number of artists contact me and ask me, about what's happening in the forest, because they're really kind of flabbergasted at the amount of trees that are dying, showing a lot of angst at what they're seeing happen to the environment and expressing a lot of that in their art. But at the same time, people were also noticing that there's actually quite a lot of beauty. So I think the fact that so many artists were just really observant of what was happening in our forests is reflected in the exhibit that we're seeing today. So it is maybe a little unusual that we have bark beetles and wood-boring insects as a theme for an exhibit. But maybe it's not so surprising, because I think artists being so observant are some of the first people to bring to our notice some of the things that are happening.
And Diana, when you get ready to share screen, can you let everyone know?
Oh, I've already been sharing. I'm sorry. It's not showing.
Yeah, so there,
Oh,
we're not able to see what you're showing us.
oh, that's
The funny thing with shared screens sometimes is you have to open the file first on your desktop,
okay.
and then when you share, there it goes.
Let me try that. Now you can see it.
We can see the Zoom meeting open.
Okay. I'm not seeing my PowerPoint.
Yeah, and that's another thing, is sometimes it makes you start over. But this looks
Are you
right.
seeing it now?
Yeah, we see 4
Okay.
slides in a PowerPoint. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry
Yeah,
for the
thank
interruption.
you. So I'm just going to back up a little bit. I'm not going to totally repeat what I just said. But okay. So yeah, this looks correct. I'm so sorry for taking off there without my slides. I thought they were showing. But I'm just going to kind of go forward. So bark beetles as a theme for an art exhibit is kind of surprising. But I think it does go to show that so many artists are seeing what's happening in our forests and are responding to it. Bark beetles are a really natural thing in our forests. They've developed outbreaks for millennia. Typically what happens is you have a warm, dry period, and you have hot summers that support their reproduction, their spread, stresses trees across large areas, and they begin to develop an outbreak. But in the past, these hot, droughty periods would come to an end. It would cool down, it would get wetter, and the beetle populations would collapse. But in recent years, of course, we're in this period of chronic warming and drying, and the beetles have really responded. And because we haven't returned back to sort of a cooler, wetter period, and we aren't expecting to anytime soon, these beetles have developed some of the biggest outbreaks ever seen. The current mountain pine beetle outbreak has been something like 100 million acres and has extended for something like 20 years. One of the problems, of course, though, is that what we're seeing is not a natural event. It's really something of our own causing. These beetles are responding to stuff that we're doing in the environment. And we have to also realize that these insects are not kind of these evil creatures that want to destroy the forest and make our lives miserable. They're just doing what they do in response to conditions. And actually, being native organisms, they have quite a lot of beauty about them. And I think that is something that certainly a lot of artists have noticed. If you look below the bark, you will see all sorts of tunnels, and almost every artist I've spoken with has equated these to sort of scribbles or calligraphy telling some sort of undecipherable message. And there's some merit to that, because every single beetle species has its own gallery pattern that can help you recognize who killed the tree, and you can actually follow each of those galleries and read the entire life history of a beetle from from egg to adult. And so there are really a lot of stories under the bark. And as an ecologist, that's kind of my job, is to decipher stories, figure out what things are going on out there, reading what the bark beetles are saying. And so if you look at this picture here, this is a drawing from one of my scientific publications where I try to show how the beetles overwhelm a tree and then use the tree to be able to develop. Beetles actually tell their own stories. They communicate with each other. In order to attack a tree, the beetles have to attack in the hundreds, sometimes even the thousands. So they have to communicate with each other. It's like, hey, come over here, I need help. They mass attack. And if they're lucky, they can kill the tree. Once they've killed the tree, though, they still have to tell stories to the rest of the beetles, because once they've overwhelmed it, they have to tell other beetles to stay away, because if they all come into the same tree, there won't be enough food for all of them to go around. So they extend out more messages saying, hey, the hotel is full, don't come in. After this kind of epic battle, where probably quite a few of them die, those that survive and have kind of conquered the tree still have an immense chore ahead of them, because now they have to survive on food. Wood as food, and wood really has almost no nutritional value. And so the beetles bring in a partner with them, which are these blue stain fungi that grow into the tree deep inside and gather up all the nutrients that are there and actually move them outward to below the bark where the beetles are developing. And that means that the beetles end up with enough nutrients to actually develop. Something else pretty phenomenal happens after that. If you look here, you can see an adult, almost an adult beetle. When this becomes an adult, it'll feed on the fungal spores, and that packs these little pockets on its exoskeleton. You can see here, this is really highly magnified. And in this pocket, these spores are acquired, and that's how they carry the fungus to the next tree. You can actually see the fungus growing out of the opening here, because the beetles produce a secretion inside that feeds and nurtures that fungus to ensure that it can make it to the next tree, because that's absolutely crucial. The beetle's fungus has to get to the next generation to ensure that they don't starve to death. So this is a whole partnership that has evolved over millennia. These beetles and fungi absolutely depend upon themselves. And it's a really ancient partnership. And so it's just one more of those incredible stories that kind of builds behind the scenes of the things we see in these forests. And this is one of the magical things about artists that perceive things that are happening in the forest, is because they can take some of this magic and some of these stories that they see and translate it into new ways for us to experience. And that's exactly what's happening in this exhibit. And so I'm going to turn things back over to Brandon, and he can introduce the artists.
Thanks so much, Diana. Up next is going to be Jim, and Jim is going to speak purely out of alphabetical order, which is such a funny way to do things, but that's what we're going to stick to. Susa's saying, darn it, it always happens this way. I wanted to talk about Jim studying first with Fairfield Porter as an undergraduate at Amherst College, which I think is just really a phenomenal biographical detail. He's one of my favorite painters. And then continuing on to graduate school at Georgia State University in Atlanta. And there he helped start with colleagues Nexus, a nonprofit photo gallery that later became the Atlanta Contemporary Art Center. He was the first photographer to have a solo exhibit at Atlanta's High Museum of Art, one of my favorite museums. and his hand-colored photographs of southern landscapes were widely collected and exhibited both regionally and nationally. For this exhibition, he's focused a little bit differently with some digital prints with some perforations, as well as some large sculptural pieces. Jim, can you bring us through your presentation and tell us a little bit about your evolution as an artist?
Sure. Well, I wasn't really at first aware when the beetle tracks started showing up in my photographs. I didn't go out to look for them. I just was out in the woods, and these kind of very intricate engravings are just there in front of you. So being a photographer, I took their picture. And it was only later that I began to pay real attention to the patterns. And I'm gonna try to share my screen here. Okay, can you guys see that? Okay, and it has gone back to the very beginning. Let's see. Well, the first slide is the same as the last, so let's see. Anyway, I was looking at these markings really with no real idea what they were. I had heard of bark beetles, so I assumed it had to do with them, although I learned later from Diana that many of the marks that I had photographed were made by wood-boring beetles rather than bark beetles, and I didn't know the difference. At this point, I was imagining what the barks meant, and I feel that that was, for me, an important process because I wanted to imagine what they were and what they might mean. And sometimes we say we're looking for answers, but what we just love the feeling of being on the edge of the unknown and not really, having to imagine what we might see. Let me try to go. Oh, okay, this is going all the way back to the beginning, sorry. I'm giving away all my secrets. Okay, so we need imagination. And this book cover is a really good illustration of that. It's based on a conference entitled Knowledge Through Imagination. And I was interested in the outlines of the tracks, and I wanted to make their forms stand out from the trunks. I decided to trace them and produce line drawings. And the idea of using a line drawing versus a photograph to illustrate a scientific concept brings up the question, where do you draw the line? Now, here is a really extreme example. This is a LiDAR image of Mayan ruins in Guatemala. The white traces show the locations of structures. And obviously, this image contains more information than is immediately apparent. And this information is carried as if in another layer. It's like above or beside the object itself. So this process of simplifying what is being considered by tracing literally draws out information which, though present in the photograph, is not obvious. And I wanted to apply this process to the photographs of the beetle tracks. For me, the intersection of representing things by their outlines and imagining what they mean is represented best by the science of pataphysics, invented by the French author Alfred Jarry. This slide shows an installation view of an exhibit of Jarry's work at the Morgan Library in New York, which was on view last year, unfortunately during the height of COVID. Jarry defined pataphysics as the science of imaginary solutions, which symbolically attributes the properties of objects described by their virtuality to their lineaments. In pataphysics, tracing the lineaments of an object yields a pattern that we can imagine to have a meaning quite different and apart from the source of the pattern, and in doing so, provides a link between the linear representation of an object and how we see it in our imagination. And if you're wondering about the practicality of using imagination to find answers to problems in the real world, entire books have been written, as we saw in this slide. So we are also all connected right now, this very minute, by processes based on math, the math of imaginary numbers. So we wouldn't be talking to each other if it wasn't for imaginary numbers. So when I started to trace the beetle tracks, like here, then the image that formed in my mind was like this. And this is a tugra, or personal cipher of one of the Ottoman sultans. These symbols, composed of stylized interwoven strokes, were unique to each ruler and served to validate each document he wrote. In the woods, there are thousands of beetles from thousands of species in thousands of trees, and each one leaves a trail that is as different as a fingerprint and as elegant as the Sultan's signature. Each trail is composed of thousands of bites taken over a period of months as the larva grows and matures. And rather than the sure stroke of the calligrapher's pen, the path literally grows with the insect. Here are 2 copies of the same photograph used in the production of 2 of the works in the exhibit. On the right, I have superimposed the tracing on the image. Now, here are 2 versions of artworks, 2 different artworks based on that tracing. The one on the left was made first. I wanted to produce objects that called for the viewer to focus attention on the pattern of the beetle galleries. I see the beetle markings as calligraphic characters, like Diana mentioned, from an unknown language, hence the title glyphs. Of course, they don't have specific individual meanings like the Sultan's tugra. The intent is to speak of the intention or idea of communication rather than to communicate something specific, to create something that looks like it has meaning, that takes the form of a thing which communicates. In this way, it is very similar to the practice of asemic writing, which is making marks that look like writing, but do not carry any specific meaning. And here I'm going to just read the quote from this book, which says, "Natural objects inscribe themselves in a foreign language. In offering the promise of communication, they are demanding that we pay attention to them, that we admit the possibility of sentience in what we usually pass over as insensate, demanding that we come to terms with a language that is to some degree familiar as a language, but it is not our language." Echoasemic art then is not using language to translate the natural world into human terms. Rather, it reminds us that natural objects may have a voice of their own. And now, others have recognized the beetle tracks as asemic writing. This is a freeze frame from a video called Asemic Writing in the Woods by Ekaterina Semigulina, in which she went into the woods and traced the tracks, filled them in with a pen. So coming back to this slide, oops, stay there. The paper version on the left is made to resemble a manuscript. The paper is thin and delicate, and it's made even more fragile by the holes that are drilled into it. And these holes refer to the many bites taken by the beetle larvae in the creation of the galleries. The idea is to present something in a form which says to the viewer, this is important, look at it closely. The right version of the slide shows a sculpture made from the same tracing. After I had made a number of these documents, glyph documents, I got the idea of making them as larger metallic objects. I had the idea of some kind of object that would have been used in a ceremony or carried in a procession. So I enlarged these outlines of the beetle galleries onto plywood, which I cut out and covered with multiple layers of copper leaf. And the idea is to make, to make objects in the form of something which is calling for our special attention as important. After I learned the difference between the wood-boring beetles and the bark beetles, thanks to Diana, and she helped me know the names of the bark beetles and where to look. And I found a number of illustrations in scientific documents, such as this old USDA document from bulletin, I guess it is, from 1909. And you see these two illustrations here and over here. And if you are able to go to the exhibit, then you will see the artworks which are made from them. This one here on paper, and this one here is a sculpture. Now, to get an idea of scale, this is about 8 feet, the sculpture. It's way bigger than the real beetles galleries. Some of them are really teeny. Here is a stick. It's about 5 inches long with the galleries in it. And I couldn't photograph it because it's round. And so I used some modeling clay to make a impression of it, and then traced that, and the end sculpture comes out like that. It's about 3 feet tall by 6 feet long. So it's about 24 times as the original galleries in the stick. Well, there's quite a bit more that could be said about I'm gonna stop sharing, okay. That could be said about the interplay of the meaning between the idea of the beetle galleries being traces as of something which is passed by, versus seeing them as signs which communicate something. There's a whole philosophical interplay there, which you could go on and on about. Of course, really the marks left by the beetles are both traces and signs. They're traces of the lives that are lived by the beetles, and they are signs of the warming climate. And the role of imagination is to understand the intersection of those things and to figure out some way forward. Thanks.
That's fascinating, Jim. Thanks so much. Next to speak is going to be Tim Musso. And Tim teaches at La Sierra University in Riverside, California. He's an interdisciplinary artist, and he really uses the natural world and all of the complex ecological relationships as a starting point, gathering imagery from these insanely long distant hikes where he's logged over 5,000 miles to date. I think he only surfaces in urban areas to get paid and fed maybe, but then he delves back into the wilderness when he can. And he's been able to exhibit this work internationally in both museums and private collections. So without further ado, Tim, thanks.
Okay, well, thank you, Brendan. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Jim, that was a brilliant and very insightful talk, and I enjoyed it tremendously. So I want to introduce you now to the actual beetle itself. Are you seeing the screen with the beetle on it? Okay, great. So I'll do a short biographical introduction of how I came to make this work, and then we'll take a look at some of the pieces and some of the process to get there. But I grew up in the west slope of the Sierra Nevada mountains in dense forest, and I was always, as a kid, interested and curious about these symbols and the writing that Diana talked about. Everybody sort of artists are drawn to and see this as writing and as having meaning. And it was only later on, as I became older and went on various backpacking trips through different forests and seeing the beetle kill firsthand that I understood the significance and the change that had happened and was happening with more and more forests. So that started with the Pacific Crest Trail back in 2005, and continued on the Continental Divide Trail in about 2013, where you would walk for 100 miles and in all directions you would see dead forests. And I thought, wow, this is a big deal, and I need to make artwork that talks about this idea. And so that's what I've done. And it's just a great honor to exhibit with everybody here in Montana. It's great to be out here making some new prints. So yeah, this first image is called The Rite of the Dendroctonus jeffrey, which is the scientific name for the bark beetle that's on display here that specifically attacks the Jeffrey pine. And I thought, if you were this beetle and you had a religion or you had something that you really valued, what would that be? And so I figured the pine cone would be like a totem or something, and the beetles here are pictured dancing around this pine cone with all the pollen coming out. And this is the thing that gives it life. And without the pine cone, there is no food source, there is no life cycle. So that's the first image. This is a small piece, wood engraving. And then I'd like to go on to another piece. This one is called The Life Cycle of the bark beetle. And this is the entire image. I'll circle here. You can see the bark beetle is down here, and I'll scroll down so you can see a close up. So in the center of the image, and this, for reference, it's a woodcut that's 64 by 96 inches. So we've got the adult form and then the pupa and the nymph form here. So that's kind of the life cycle there. And if we scroll back up here, you can see the healthy Jeffrey pine here on the left, and then the pine as it starts to die, and then it's completely compromised and dead. And intermingled in all of this is the life cycle of animals. There's bones, there's mycorrhizae. You can see these filament hyphae sticking out here from the fungi. So I wanted to sort of take all this stuff, both seen and unseen, what happens beneath the bark and what happens in the soil, and kind of try to visualize that into one iconic image that tells the story of the life cycle of the beetle and the life cycle of the trees. So those are the two pieces from the show I'm going to show right now. You'll have to go see the exhibit if you want to see the rest. But I want to say I want to talk a little about the choice to use woodcut to depict these scenes. First of all, the subject matter, is wood, and it's something that's close to my heart growing up in a logging town. And in grad school, I really developed, this technique of cutting the wood and communicating through light and dark, positive, negative, an image. And so I thought it was perfect sort of metaphor to use an engraving tool to engrave into the wood a negative space, ink up the positive space, and then make a print, right? Because the beetle bores into the tree. And in fact, the beetles that attack furs are called fur engravers. And so I'm using an engraving tool to make these marks, engrave into the wood itself, and then make a print. And just as the beetles come in and multiply by the millions, with a matrix, once you carve the wooden matrix, you can make multiple prints, and prints can suddenly start metastasizing and spreading throughout the world, which I think is a cool art metaphor to the life cycle of the beetle itself. And this work, I came to make this work through extensive traveling, as Brandon mentioned in the introduction, and hiking in lots and lots of places, and making sketches and developing images, and taking all of that experience and all that exploration, all that curiosity about what's out there and how does it work, and bringing that back and making these highly complex images. So I'll show you, I want to show you a slideshow here that I modified from the presentation I gave today briefly, and then we'll end with a video. So this is the creative process. Curiosity and risk leads to discovery, leads to accumulation of experience, leads to intuition and generation, making the artwork, and then connecting with people and communicating ideas. That's what I value being an artist. So I'll go through quickly some slides. here. Is it full screen? Can everybody still see? Yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, here I am out hiking, gathering, collecting images and material, whether it's backcountry skiing or in the summertime backpacking, hiking around the world, whether it's, yeah, the West Side, the Rockies, all to create works. This one's not in the show, but this is a work I made based on my hikes. I'll just go through this briefly because I don't want to take up too much time. More hiking, always collecting imagery, right? Another work that I made in New Zealand is a close-up. Most recent hike I did was in Utah on the Colorado Plateau. Navigating with compass, mostly just maps, really. GPS is a backup. These are my favorite hiking materials here. My filter, my gloves, get me through a lot of things. And all these trips, you know, encompass massive planning and preparing food. But all of that work and all that effort and all the uncomfort and the mosquitoes and the sleepless nights and worrying about bears grunting in the night, it all pays off when you get to this right here and you're skiing out and you get this distinct shadow. And this shadow actually is in the print that I showed you that had the 3 trees, the Jeffrey trees at the top. This shadow is actually in that print, but it took me hundreds of miles to find this shadow to put into that work. And so you accumulate this experience. You know, I keep a sketchbook. I'm always sketching. You can see this super simple sketch here leading to the final artwork on the right. There we've got the Jeffrey pine cone. No beetles in this one right here. But yeah, there's a close-up detail. This is what I've been sketching with recently. Just a few shots of my sketchbooks here. And I think all of this is really to share with you the process that I've arrived at these kind of compositions that are in the exhibition. So we'll end here with this slide, and then I'll show you a short 3-minute video that shows more of the process. But I carry around when I'm backpacking a tube of paper and a tombstone rubbing crayon, and actually making a relief print off of the tree itself here with the crayon. And this rubbing here looks a lot like Jim's work that he was talking about and kind of his technique. In using this, and I traced it just like he showed, and then drew that onto the wood block and then carved it. And so this also is in that block. So it's just basically a collage of all these experiences in the forest. Okay, so let me close this window and then we'll proceed here to a video. Okay, so I've edited down a 12-minute video made by John Wong and Eric Hardy that's about 2 years old that shows my process as an artist. And this 3-minute section of the overall 12-minute, I think gives a good overview from initial drawing and sketching to transferring the image on the block, cutting the block, inking the block, and then printing the block. So I'll show this and then we can move on to Suze's presentation. You know, looking back now, it makes sense that, you know, I do wood cuts, oftentimes of trees and wood. You know, I grew up in essentially a forest in the west slope of the Sierra Nevada mountains, in a town of roughly 50 people. And so, you gotta relish and cherish it. Harder and harder to find, but it's still there. I think it'll be there for a while. Fight apathy. Apathy's so boring. The only way we come to knowledge is through observation, and to actually observe something accurately takes so much focus. And I think a lot of people don't have the patience for that much focus. And so, you know, if you actually do see something, you go out and you really try to look at it, it seems like if you make work about that experience, it has to be very intense and very obsessive, or it's not going to be accurate. the experience is what has mattered to me, and then share that experience, not through a photo, but through the artwork itself. And it's abstracted in such a way that no one can say, oh, well, that clearly was from the Grand Canyon, or that was clearly from this peak in the Sierra. You can't go there and take a picture and have my woodcut appear. I become this filter for representing what I experience, the surprises I come across, in a way that doesn't diminish those areas at all. Okay, so yeah, you can watch the rest of the video on my website if you want to watch the rest, but that gives you a general sense of how I work. And just to be clear, that was an exhibition at Glendale Community College in Los Angeles area. That was not here in Montana, but a lot of the works in that last scene are also here in Montana. Well, thank you very much. I'll pass it back to Brendan.
I'll make a plug for your catalog too, that there's, I think, 4 copies left of your catalog here at the Missoula Art Museum, which is on sale. And that covers a decade of work, I believe, doesn't it, Tim? Yeah, that's great. Well, hopefully everybody will be able to come down and see the exhibition. It's been really a fantastic show, and we've had such a good reception from audiences. Suze, I feel like, is really the instigator in this group, and that's part of the reason we did the alphabetical order because it's been our interaction over the past 2 years that have really prepared this exhibition. You submitted the proposal, you had the vision for how this was going to come together, and you were the point person that I worked with that kind of wrangled everybody. And that was really instrumental to forming the exhibition. Suze is a Seattle-based artist, and just like Tim, she also makes work about human relationships to nature, and Jim, I should say, and often identifies as a painter, even though that she works in all these other media. And after her initial undergraduate studies, she ended up pursuing 5th-year studies in printmaking and ceramics at the University of Washington. And really, as a painter, she explores all sorts of different media, from watercolor to paper casting, and makes these wonderful artist books, which are featured in the exhibition. And so you can see her work with a very active exhibition schedule and collected across the United States. I think it's not tonight, I was looking at the date really quickly, but she has another exhibition opening at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman in just a few days. So it's pretty amazing to have dual exhibitions in Montana at the same time. Without further ado, Suze.
Okay, let me switch here to my slides. So it seems kind of odd to start with paintings, for sure, but I have been hiking around forests all my life, and I certainly noticed increasing burned areas. So I've been painting them all over the North American West, from the arid Southwest to my own home Cascades, to Mesa Verde, and I'm fascinated by those burned trees. But so how did I end up making books? Well, I started making books with digital prints of my paintings. So some of the first ones I did were there's a pop-up book of those burned trees. It's logical for someone who works in a series to think about making books. It's a great alternative to painting. Instead of being an eyeful on the wall, they're sequential, they're kind of animation almost. small, although mine keep getting bigger, and kind of intimate. I started out actually making books out of materials like rocks. And after a while realized I really didn't care whether there were images in them or not, that the materials and the form were the story of the book. In this one, I interpolated 2 rocks from one to the other in shape across 16 or however many steps. And lo and behold, I ended up with a mesa. And so as I'm hiking through those forests on the way to find burned trees, I started seeing.
Your image. I don't think.
Oh, can anybody see my image? My shared screen? Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm terribly sorry. Let me see if I can, I think I neglected to share my screen properly. My apology. Okay, here we go. Okay, thank you. So I'll quickly go back through these burned tree images that I was describing from all over the West. And then I started making books out of digital images, prints of my paintings. And that I interpolate one shape to another using software, and that the form and the materials end up being the story, and I quit needing to have paintings inside them. And as I'm hiking around to find all those burned trees, I kept noticing the script, the scribble, the hieroglyphics in every place I went, including Montana. So this is the first one I made. I thought I'd go through the ones that are in the exhibit and tell you a little bit of background about them. This one's quite small. It's 2 pieces of bark with galleries on them and holes in the bark. And I interpolated those shapes across these steps, as well as the holes that go between the 2 different pieces of bark. This is the 3rd one I think I made. Same method, same working method. It's called wire edge binding, kind of beautiful in its own right. And here I interpolated those shapes across iron oxide dyed felt. And something about the patterns in the felt reminded me of the Beatles galleries. And then by about volume 10, I started imitating the scripts myself. So I made a series of them from different species, different trees, and I called it Encyclopedia Beetletania. I was under the partly erroneous notion, and I'm not alone in this, that all that standing dead wood had to be fuel for fires. It's not that dead wood doesn't burn, but that think turpentine and resin that is in a live tree actually torches a lot faster than dead wood. And there are cases in Colorado where beetle-killed forest actually acted as a fire break. So this one is tracings I made, like Jim, only in the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming, and that's tea-dyed antique Japanese rice paper on the pages, and very large pieces of ponderosa bark embedded in very thick resin for the covers. And I asked the entomologist I've talked with at the University of Washington a number of times, I said, is it okay that I've got wood boring beetles on the inside and bark beetles on the outside? And he said, I think of the bark beetles as the primary invaders and the wood borers as the janitors. This one is one of my favorites. It's from a log from the east side of the Cascades with fur engravers on it. I rubbed logs in Colorado and laser print transferred them to laser cut mat board. And the proportion of the page, of each page that has the rubbings on it, matches the spread of mountain pine beetle in the canal timber supply area of central British Columbia. So the book is a graph, and I called it, you could see the foredge of the book is a bar chart, and I called it Art is Data Too in Latin. This one, I was inspired by a paper where they used satellite imagery to try to assess the extent of mortality. And they would count a green pixel, which is about 30 square meters, as a live forest, a red pixel as attacked because their needles turn red before they fall off, and a gray pixel as dead. So this not only interpolates the shape from one piece of beetle-chewed bark to another, but the colors. This one was probably one of the more technically difficult. I was interested in the fact that this, I think, big leaf maple branch had galleries on it, and the rot in the wood made the galleries turn black. So it was black on white, the galleries are usually lighter on dark. The branch is 27 inches long. It was curved. And when I split it, the split was off axis. So tough to figure out how to fill that space with something flat like wooden pages. I ended up making a 3D scan by hand of one of the surfaces, interior surfaces, lofting it in a 3D program, and then having that sliced and laser cut. One of my more challenging projects. It took a long time. This is 2 small sticks with laser cut cotton vellum and laser etched. And I have a recording of the poet reading the poem.
Larva, from a Latin word that meant ghost, specter, disembodied spirit, demon. The forests are haunted. Press an ear to the bark, you can hear scribbling. Beetle larvae grave the wood in their dark underworld, marking the tree for death. In runic calligraphies, in cuneiforms, in hieroglyphs of hunger, they write by excavation, by gnawing forward toward the next life, the life with wings. The larval galleries are inked sometimes with blue stain fungus. What is being said? Fiat justitia ruat caelum? Let justice be done though the heavens fall. Fiat justitia ne periat mundus? Let justice be done that the world not perish. The dying trees flush red, then blench to gray. High on the mountains, where air is arid and cold, they stand for decades, ruined, limbs rattling when the wind is up. These are called ghost forests.
That poem still gives me goosebumps. So this one, which is at the museum, is one where I directly got information from Diana. We tromped around the forests in Southern Oregon together, and that is a log with mountain pine beetle galleries on it. And I recapitulated those galleries across the pages. She did work that studied the DNA of surviving white bark pines after a beetle attack. And it turned out that the trees that made less of their defensive chemistry were actually the survivors, because the beetles perceive that chemistry. So the proportion of dark or quiet pages in the book is the same proportion as the number of white bark pines that survived in her research tract. This one I called Codex Genetica. It uses the same combination of galleries and the base pairs of messenger RNA that turns on the gene for one of those defensive chemicals. And I wanted to make it such in a form with signatures bound between wedges such that it could become a log again. And Beetlegraph is 3 little books, 3 separate books that together form another graph, another bit of artistic data. So this is a 10-year record of beetle mortality in the state of Washington. That's mountain pine beetle on the left, and fir engraver in the middle, and Douglas fir beetle on the right. So I think you could see it's actually the same subject matter as burned trees. They just look completely different. So the climate impacts are what interest me, as well as those kind of structured random textures. A written metaphor for an increasingly urgent message, an exploration of form, material, ideas, and data. I like to call them small kinetic sculptures that use bookbinding techniques. And it's been made so much richer by the involvement of scientists, poets, printers, paper artists, foresters. It's easy to get depressed by this kind of material for me. I feel like nothing I can do will matter. But the head of the UW Climate Impacts Group at the University of Washington reframed that as the only thing that matters is what I can do. And I was very pleased when she listed off a list of actions, one of which was painting and communicating. So that was Amy Snover. So for me, this kind of collaboration has just been a mother lode of creativity. Dr. Six, Dr. Peterson, Dr. Tobin, Melinda Muller, the poet, engineers, information specialists from the Forest Service, our state entomologist in Washington, and so on. Couldn't do it without all of them. And so if you want to see more, you can search on books about bark beetles on Vimeo or visit my website. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Suze. All those collaborators, it just reminds me so much about how the beetles have formed essential partnerships with fungi. And that's what I see you guys doing, all you artists working together with these essential partnerships. No, I don't mean to make light of it. I think that collaboration has really been key to this project and to how the work has been presented. We do have a few questions coming in. And if anybody else would like to pose a question, use that question and answer feature. But one of the ones that really struck me as it came in was each of you has described this work in spiritual terms, using totem or ritual. And why do you think that is? And that's an open question that anybody can take. It's strange because it's seemingly so much at odds with science a little bit. You know, as you think about science as being very exact and measurable and specific and everything, and with spirituality being connected to mystery. I think you said that very specifically, Tim. So I was going to call on you, but I don't want to put you on the spot.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I think all of us here probably relate to trees more deeply than the average person, which is why we've invested so much time on this topic. But I think I'm always aware of how little that I know, how little that I don't understand. And probably all of us are that way. And I think you get more that way as you get older and you know more, you realize you know less. And I think just our understanding of how trees interact and communicate with each other through the roots and the fungi, I mean, that's really, we understand that much more we do now than we did 20 years ago. But I think there's still so much that we don't know. And so I think mystery serves as maybe like a little push to keep investigating, to keep exploring, keep trying to understand with the knowledge that you never will truly understand. So that's my quick response to that very, very good, interesting question that's going to preoccupy my mind now for quite a while, I think.
Someone asked me a week ago, did I think trees had souls? And I was quite unprepared for the question. But between the kinds of things Tim is talking about and the cooperative communication that Diana was talking about with the beetles, I certainly think there's forms of intelligence that we are not used to thinking of as a kind of intelligence.
I would say that also that science is not necessarily so motivated purely by empirical things. I once saw a lecture to an advanced audience on the subject of quantum field theory. And the man asked, why would you study quantum field theory? And his answer was to understand the ephemeral nature of life. So here is the motivation of a top physicist who will then go on and talk to you about math for an hour and a half. But that was his motivation.
That's great, Jim. It also anticipated one of the questions that was brought in. And the question was, the science around bark beetles is very based in observation and measurement and very specific. Why is the imagery so abstract? And I think that that's occurred to a couple different people who saw the exhibition, but I think that your answer really hits that on the head. We do have another question that just came in. Collaborating across disciplines can be very challenging. What are some lessons that you've learned through collaborations between art and science, or at this interface between art and science?
Diana, I think you and I should take that together. But I could say from my side that I make a very sincere effort to read the work and understand what they're doing before asking questions. Their time is often even more hectic than mine. And so respecting someone else's time, I think, is a big part of any collaboration.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think that it's not teaching each other what you're doing. It's learning to look at things differently. And so artists and scientists, if they're any good, are innately creative beings. I mean, that science is very creative and art obviously is very creative. It's just that the ways of doing it and the language to communicate is often quite different. And that's where sometimes the difficulty of these collaborations can come in. But if you sit back and you learn to see and listen through the other person's eyes, then you learn more about the mystery and you learn to work together better. And I mean, that's what artists like, and scientists are mysteries. I mean, it's innately, it's curiosity, right? Yeah.
I've always found that I got completely different kinds of ideas than if I had worked solely by myself. And so for me, it's a source of real creativity.
That's great. That was a good answer. Thank you. One other person commented about your using this as a metaphor, Susan, that last slide is really interesting because the beetle galleries are described as ciphers and glyphs and take the form of prints and books and impression seals, and that idea of communication and writing, it seems so intrinsic to this, and it really becomes clear once you think about it in a metaphoric way. Where does that term galleries come from in this scientific use?
I wish I knew. I was looking at and admiring that document by Hopkins that Jim was showing, because that he was like the bark beetle god. He described all of Dendroctonus. It's amazing. And he was already using those terms, galleries, back in those days. And I'm not quite sure where that came from, but it's stuck. And I think most of us prefer it to tunnels, because in some way it expresses something more than just a tube under the bark, right? A gallery is almost somewhere to explore. I don't know, that's just my perspective, but it's been around for a very long time, but scientists haven't tossed it out the door for some reason.
We have one more question, one more comment before a question here. Is it necessary to experience wildness to make the work that you've done in this exhibition?
Well, I'll start and say that I'm old enough that I've seen such huge changes in what I thought was unchanging when I was younger. So for me, experiencing it directly, yes, is very important, both in the immediate close-up observation sense and in the change through time, and having memory of things looking different.
That's a great answer, Zeus. I would say for me, being in wild places is a chance to have time to oneself and a chance to really observe and to think and to dream and to imagine and to sketch. And without that space and creating that space for yourself, I would not be able to make any of the work that I do because it's all a matter of a lot of contemplation, a lot of observation. But I think certainly you could make work about bark beetles and not go to wild places. I don't know that would quite have the same impact, but I think you probably could be done.
Well, I would say that the natural surroundings, the natural environment, or of course we're all part of the environment, right? But it doesn't necessarily occur in what we traditionally think of as very wild. It may occur really right next to where we're going, and people just don't necessarily see it. There's a lot of beetle galleries on the road up to a local area here, the Mill Creek Canyon, and people drive right by it, and they're going to have a picnic or whatever else, which is, a good thing to do, but they're not being aware of what they're seeing. And they may also walk right past things in the woods. They're involved with who their friend they're with, or listening to their earpiece or whatever. And what's important, I think, more than the wildness of the place, is the attention that we bring to our surroundings wherever we are. So that's my 2 cents worth.
I'll add one little perspective from a scientist, and that is that you don't have to be in a wilderness to be amongst the wild. Bark beetles are wild wherever they are. They're not domesticated. Neither are the microbes. And so there's a lot of wild around us. And I personally can't imagine having a scientific career based on anything domesticated, because it's really in the wildness, however small, that brings out, that's the beauty in our planet. And I tend to look small, so I see wild in small places. So it's really all around us. We're wiping it out, but it's still all around us.
Those are great answers. Thank you. And I think I inadvertently published this comment from Paul, where he says, I recently saw a documentary on the hidden life of trees by Peter Wolben. It addressed the social aspect of trees and how they support one another in the entire life cycle of trees. Thank you so much for this incredible presentation. And Paul, forgive my clumsiness in publishing that live. But yes, thank you all for an incredible presentation. That was really great. Are there any final questions before we tune out? If you were in front of a live audience, this is the point where you'd hear thunderous applause and a wonderful hoots and cheers. So thank everybody for being part of this evening, and thank you, audience, for sticking with us. This was really fantastic. We have one more comment. I'm struck by the similarity between burrowing into the detail and pulling back to recognize the pattern of relations that is both science and art. That's fantastic. We've got a few claps. We're getting all sorts of digital claps, digital applause, emoji applause. Thank you, everyone. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. This concludes our artist talk with the wonderful Jim Frazier, Tim Musso, and Suze Wolf. Thanks again.